The autumn rain hammered against the windows of the dispersal hut at RAF Coltishall, Norfolk, creating a steady drumbeat that matched the tension in the air. It was October 18, 1940, and Flight Lieutenant Robert Ashford stood near the coal stove, trying to warm hands that had been cold since dawn. Outside, barely visible through the grey curtain of rain, sat his aircraft. A Bristol Beaufighter, one of the newest additions to RAF Fighter Command's night fighter force. The twin-engine fighter looked brutish and powerful, its blunt nose housing 4 20mm cannons and 6 303 machine guns, the heaviest armament of any British fighter. But impressive firepower meant nothing if you couldn't hit your target, and that was where Ashford's problems began. Ashford was 26 years old, older than most fighter pilots, and he had come to fighters through an unusual route. Before the war, he had been a competitive target shooter, representing Britain at the 1936 Berlin Olympics in rifle shooting. He hadn't won a medal, but he had placed 8th overall, a respectable showing. When war broke out in 1939, he had volunteered for the RAF, expecting his shooting background to be an asset. Instead, it had become something of a liability, or at least a source of endless mockery from his squadron mates. The problem was that Ashford approached aerial gunnery the same way he approached target shooting, with methodical precision, careful aim, and a reluctance to fire until he was absolutely certain of a hit. In ground shooting, this was the mark of an expert. In aerial combat, where everything happened at tremendous speed and targets never stayed still, it looked like hesitation, like fear, like incompetence. During training at the gunnery range, Ashford's instructors had been baffled. When firing at towed targets, he would wait, line up his shot with excruciating care, and then fire short, precise bursts. His hit rate was excellent, nearly 80%, but his rate of fire was slow. Other pilots hammered away at targets, expending thousands of rounds, scoring hit rates of maybe 20 or 30%, but filling the air with so much lead that something was bound to connect. The instructors told Ashford he needed to be more aggressive, to spray and pray like everyone else. Ashford had tried, but it went against every instinct he had developed over years of competitive shooting. Wasting ammunition felt wrong, almost immoral. When you had a target in your sights, you aimed carefully and made the shot count. You didn't just blaze away and hope for the best. His squadron mates had picked up on his careful shooting style quickly. They called him Deadeye, but not as a compliment. It was mockery, gentle but persistent. They said he shot like he was at Bisley rifle range, not in aerial combat. They joked that he probably called out his shots like a competition shooter. Aiming for the left engine, firing now. During the Battle of Britain through the summer of 1940, Ashford had flown Hurricanes and had scored 2 confirmed kills against German bombers, but both had required multiple attack passes because he had been too conservative with his ammunition on the first approaches. His squadron leader had written in his evaluation, "Capable pilot with good technical skills, but lacks the killer instinct necessary for fighter operations. Recommend transfer to Bomber or Coastal Command." The transfer had come through in September, but not to bombers. Instead, Ashford had been assigned to the newly forming night fighter squadrons equipped with Bristol Beaufighters. The night fighting role was experimental, dangerous, and had a high casualty rate. Most pilots saw it as a dead-end posting, a place where the RAF sent pilots who weren't quite good enough for day fighters. Ashford had accepted the assignment without complaint, and if he was honest with himself, with some relief. Night fighting was different from the wild dogfights of daylight combat. It was more methodical, more calculated. You stalked your prey using radar, closed to visual range, identified your target, and made one careful attack. In theory, it suited his shooting style perfectly. In practice, he hadn't yet had the chance to prove it. His radar operator, Sergeant Thomas Whitaker, pushed through the door of the dispersal hut, shaking rain from his coat. Whitaker was 34, a radar technician who had been trained on the new airborne interception equipment that was supposed to allow night fighters to find enemy bombers in the dark. The technology was temperamental, the equipment was heavy and complex, and the failure rate was high. But when it worked, it was revolutionary. "Aircraft's ready, sir," Whitaker said, pouring himself tea from the pot on the stove. Ground crew replaced that dodgy radio set. "Should have better communication tonight." "Assuming there's anything to communicate about," said Flying Officer Davies from the corner where he sat playing solitaire. Davies flew the other Beaufighter in their section. Jerry's haven't come over in strength for 3 nights. Maybe they've given up on the night bombing campaign. Ashford doubted that. Since September, the Luftwaffe had shifted to night bombing after their daylight raids had proven too costly. Every night, German bombers crossed the Channel to hit British cities: London, Coventry, Birmingham, Liverpool. The Blitz, the newspapers called it. The RAF's night defences were still primitive, mostly relying on searchlights and anti-aircraft guns. The few night fighters available were struggling to find the bombers in the vast darkness, let alone shoot them down. If Ashford's squadron could prove that radar-equipped night fighters were effective, it would change the entire dynamic of the air war. But so far, results had been disappointing. In 6 weeks of operations, his squadron had scored exactly 3 confirmed kills, and Ashford personally had yet to even fire his guns in anger at night. The telephone rang and the duty officer grabbed it. Everyone in the hut fell silent, watching his face. He listened for a moment, then grabbed a pencil and began writing rapidly. When he hung up, his expression was grim. That was Group HQ. Radar stations are tracking a major raid forming up over France. Estimated 100+ bombers heading for London. All available night fighters are to scramble immediately. The hut erupted into motion. Pilots grabbed their flight gear, ground crew ran for the aircraft, and within minutes, engines were roaring to life across the airfield. Ashford and Whittaker sprinted through the rain to their Beaufighter, clambering aboard as mechanics pulled the wheel chocks. The twin Bristol Hercules engines caught and settled into a powerful rumble. Ashford ran through his checks rapidly but thoroughly. Every instrument, every control, everything had to be right. They took off into the darkness and rain, the Beaufighter lifting off heavily and climbing into the murk. Ashford flew on instruments, the world beyond his windscreen an impenetrable black. At 3,000 feet, they broke through the cloud layer into clear air. Above, the stars were brilliant, and a half-moon hung in the eastern sky. Perfect conditions for night fighting if they could find the bombers. Whittaker's voice crackled over the intercom from his position in the nose, hunched over the radar display. "Radar's warming up, sir. Should have it operational in 2 minutes." They climbed to 15,000 feet and began a patrol pattern off the coast, waiting for direction from ground control. Other night fighters would be doing the same, strung out across southern England, trying to intercept the incoming raid. It was like trying to find specific fish in the ocean at midnight, knowing they were there somewhere but unable to see them. Mongoose Red 1, this is Starlight Control. We have multiple contacts crossing the coast at Dover, heading 320, altitude 15,000. Vector 090 to intercept. Ashford acknowledged and turned to the indicated heading, advancing the throttles. The Beaufighter accelerated, the 2 powerful engines driving it through the night sky at nearly 300 miles per hour. Fast for a heavy fighter, but the German bombers were no slouches either. If they were Heinkel 111s or Junkers 88s, they would be cruising at around 220 miles per hour. He had maybe 80 miles per hour of overtake speed, which meant closing from behind would take time. "Contact," Whittaker's voice was excited. "Bearing 085, range 3 miles, slightly above us." "Good show," Ashford replied, his voice steady. This was the moment of truth. Everything depended on the radar now, on Whittaker's ability to guide him to visual contact. "He's at 16,000 feet, maintaining heading. Range 2 miles. Ashford climbed gently, his eyes straining into the darkness ahead. At night, visual acquisition was maddeningly difficult. You had to look slightly to the side of where you expected the target, using your peripheral vision, which was more sensitive to faint light. Stare directly at the target, and it would disappear. 1 mile, he's dead ahead, maybe 200 feet above us. And then Ashford saw it. A dark shape against the stars, the unmistakable silhouette of a German bomber. As they closed, the shape resolved into a Heinkel 111, its greenhouse nose and twin engines distinctive even in the moonlight. This was the critical moment. In daylight combat, you could attack from any angle, using speed and maneuverability. At night, you got 1 chance, maybe 2 if you were lucky. Attack from the wrong angle, and the bomber's gunners would see your exhaust flames and open fire, often scoring hits before you could engage. Attack too aggressively, and you would overshoot and lose contact in the darkness. Ashford had studied the intelligence reports, knew the Heinkel 111's defensive armament: 3 machine guns, 1 in the nose, 1 in a dorsal position, 1 in a ventral gondola. The blind spots were from directly below and from behind and slightly below, where the ventral gunner couldn't depress his weapon far enough and the dorsal gunner couldn't see. Ashford positioned his Beaufighter in that blind spot, 200 yards directly astern and 50 feet below the Heinkel, matching its speed exactly. He was so close that he could see details: the exhaust glow from the bomber's engines, the moonlight reflecting off the greenhouse canopy, even the swastika on the tail. His thumb rested on the firing button. All 10 of his weapons, 4 cannons and 6 machine guns, were bore-sighted to converge at 200 yards. One squeeze and he could pump devastating firepower into the bomber. The other pilots would have opened fire by now, hammering the trigger, filling the air with tracers. But Ashford waited, studying the target, calculating. The Heinkel was flying straight and level, probably approaching its bomb release point over London. The pilot was focused on navigation, the crew on their bombing run. They had no idea a British night fighter was sitting 50 feet below them, waiting. Ashford made minute adjustments to his position, accounting for the Beaufighter's slight speed advantage, the gentle turbulence, the relative positions. He aimed not at where the bomber was, but at a specific point: the junction between the fuselage and the left wing, where the fuel tanks were located and where structural damage would be catastrophic. At exactly 200 yards range, with his aim perfect, he pressed the firing button. The Beaufighter shuddered as 10 guns fired simultaneously. In daylight, the recoil would have been manageable. At night, the muzzle flashes were blinding, completely destroying his night vision. Ashford fired for exactly 2 seconds, a carefully controlled burst, then released the trigger and broke hard left to avoid collision and debris. When his vision cleared, spots still dancing in front of his eyes, he looked back and saw the Heinkel with its left wing fully engulfed in flames. The bomber rolled left, the wing folding up, and it fell away into a vertical spin. Ashford watched it all the way down, counting seconds. At 8 seconds, the bomber exploded, a brief orange flash against the dark ground far below. 1. Christ, Whitaker breathed over the intercom. You got him, first burst, dead center. Lucky shot, Ashford replied, though he knew it hadn't been luck. It had been careful aim, perfect positioning, and patience. Mongoose Red 1, Starlight Control, confirm your contact is destroyed? Confirmed. 1 Heinkel 111 destroyed. Excellent work. We have multiple additional contacts in your area. Can you remain on station? Affirmative. We have fuel and ammunition. Ashford's heart was pounding now, adrenaline flooding his system. 1 kill. He had proven the concept, proven that radar-directed night fighters could find and destroy bombers in the darkness. But there were dozens more bombers in the stream, all heading for London, all carrying bombs that would kill civilians. If he could get another chance. Mongoose Red 1, Vector 110, we have a contact, range 4 miles, same altitude. Ashford turned to the new heading, and the hunt began again. Whitaker stared at his radar screen, calling out ranges and bearings. 2 miles. 1 mile. Contact visual, Ashford called. Another bomber, this time a Junkers 88, identifiable by its more angular shape and the distinctive shape of its glazed nose. He positioned himself in the same blind spot, below and behind, taking his time, ignoring the voice in his head that screamed at him to fire now before he loses it in the darkness. At 200 yards, with perfect position, he fired another 2-second burst. The results were even more spectacular than the first time. His shells tore through the Junkers' right engine and into the wing fuel tank. The entire right wing exploded, separating from the fuselage. The bomber disintegrated in mid-air, pieces tumbling through the darkness. 2. They had been airborne for 45 minutes, and Ashford had 2 confirmed kills with 2 bursts. His ammunition expenditure was minimal, his shooting clinically precise. The radio was alive with chatter now. Other night fighters were engaging, scoring kills, but also missing, losing contact, struggling with the radar equipment. Ashford's squadron mates were having mixed results. Davies had found a bomber but had lost it after his first attack missed. Another crew had scored a kill but had damaged their own aircraft, flying through debris from the exploding bomber. Starlight Control, Mongoose Red 1. Request additional vectors. Mongoose Red 1, we have contacts all across the board. Pick your heading, you'll find something. Suggest vector 090, that's the main stream. Ashford turned east, flying parallel to the bomber stream's track toward London. Whittaker found another contact almost immediately. Range 2 miles, slightly below them now. Visual contact came quickly, another Heinkel 111. Same setup, same careful positioning, same patient wait for the perfect moment. At 200 yards, he fired. The Heinkel's left engine exploded, and the bomber fell away trailing fire. 3. Sir, I'm tracking another contact, practically right next to that one. They're flying in a loose formation. Ashford's pulse quickened. If there was a formation, he might be able to get multiple bombers before they realized what was happening. He scanned the darkness and spotted it. Another Heinkel, perhaps 300 yards away from where the first one had been. The German crews had probably seen the explosion, were probably terrified, but in the darkness they couldn't see the British fighter, couldn't see death stalking them. Ashford slid into position below the second Heinkel. The bomber was taking evasive action now, gentle weaving, the pilot trying to throw off an attack he couldn't see but knew was coming. Ashford matched the movements, staying locked in position like a shadow. The Beaufighter handled beautifully at night, stable and responsive. At 200 yards, accounting for the bomber's weaving, he led his target slightly and fired. Another 2-second burst, another perfect shot. This Heinkel didn't explode or catch fire. Instead, it simply nosed over and dove straight down, the pilots probably dead in their seats from the shells that had torn through the cockpit. 4. Ashford's hands were steady, his breathing controlled. He felt like he was back at the Olympic shooting range, that same sense of focus, of time slowing down, of perfect clarity. Each target was a problem to be solved, angles and distances and timing. His competitive shooting background, the thing his squadron mates had mocked, was proving to be exactly the right skill set for this kind of combat. Mongoose Red 1, this is Mongoose Red 2. Davies here. Did you just get 2 more? We saw the explosions. Confirmed Red 2, 4 total. There was a long pause on the radio. Then Davies' voice awed. 4, in one patrol? How much ammunition have you got left? Ashford glanced at his ammunition counter. Approximately 90%. Another long pause. Davies was clearly doing the math. 4 bombers destroyed with 4 bursts, using only 10% of his ammunition load. That was unheard of efficiency. Most pilots expended their entire ammunition load to get 1 kill, if they got a kill at all. Christ, Ashford, save some for the rest of us. But there was no mockery in Davies' voice now, only respect. Starlight Control, Mongoose Red 1. Request additional vectors. Mongoose Red 1, you're cleared to continue hunting. The raid is still in progress. Be advised your fuel state. Ashford checked his fuel gauge. They had been airborne for over an hour now. The Beaufighter had good endurance, but not infinite. He had maybe 40 more minutes before he would need to return to base, 40 minutes to find more bombers. Whittaker found the next contact quickly. The German bomber stream was so dense tonight that radar contacts were everywhere. This time it was a Dornier 17, the older flying pencil bomber that was being phased out of frontline service but was still used for night raids. Ashford positioned, aimed and fired. The Dornier's thin fuselage was no match for his concentrated firepower. The bomber broke in half, the rear section separating completely. 5. The next bomber was another Junkers 88, this one taking violent, evasive action, corkscrewing through the sky. Someone had warned them, probably a radio call from another bomber crew that had seen the explosions. The German pilot was good, throwing his aircraft around the sky with a desperation born of terror. But the Junkers 88 was a bomber, not a fighter, and its evasive maneuvers bled energy quickly. Ashford waited, patient, tracking the bomber's movements, predicting rather than following. When the Junkers straightened out for just a moment, catching its breath before the next maneuver, Ashford was ready. He fired from 250 yards, slightly longer range than ideal, but his aim was perfect. The burst hit the Junkers cockpit and right engine. The bomber rolled inverted and fell. 6. Ashford's fuel gauge was showing 30 minutes remaining. Time for one more, maybe two if he was very lucky. Whitaker was silent now, concentrating on his radar, knowing that every second counted. Contact, bearing 070, range 1 mile, slightly above. Ashford turned toward the contact, eyes straining. There, a darker shape against the night sky. As he closed, he identified it as another Heinkel 111. This would be his seventh. 7 bombers in one patrol. It would be a record, unprecedented for a night fighter. He positioned himself carefully, but something was different about this bomber. It was weaving erratically, and as he closed to 300 yards, he saw why. It was already damaged. One engine was trailing smoke, the vertical stabilizer was partially shot away, probably from anti-aircraft fire. The bomber was struggling, barely maintaining altitude, clearly trying to make it back to France. Ashford held his position, studying the damaged bomber. It was probably going to crash anyway, or at best make it to the channel before ditching. Did it count as a kill if he shot down a bomber that was already mortally wounded? His training said yes. His orders were to destroy enemy bombers, regardless of their condition. A damaged bomber could still drop its bombs, still kill civilians. And yet, something made him hesitate. This wasn't like the Olympic range, where every target was the same. This was a wounded aircraft limping home, its crew probably terrified, probably injured, definitely hoping to survive. Then he saw the bomber's bay doors open. The Heinkel still had its bombs, and it was about to drop them, probably just to reduce weight for the flight home, but they would fall on English soil, might hit a village or farm. The moral calculation resolved itself. At 200 yards, he fired his shortest burst yet, barely 1 second, just enough to ensure the kill without excessive violence. The shells hit the Heinkel's remaining good engine. The bomber nosed down gently and began a long glide toward the ground. He saw parachutes beginning to deploy, white mushrooms against the darkness. 7. Mongoose Red 1. This is Starlight Control. We're tracking you as having engaged 7. Repeat 7 separate targets. Can you confirm? 7 confirmed destroyed Starlight Control, returning to base, low fuel. Understood, Mongoose Red 1. Bloody outstanding work. All of Fighter Command will hear about this. The flight back to Coltishall seemed to take forever. Ashford flew mechanically, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline draining away and leaving him hollow. Beside him, Whitaker was unusually quiet. Finally, the radar operator spoke. "Sir, I counted your bursts. 7 bombers, 7 bursts. You didn't miss once, not once. I've never seen shooting like that." "Just waited for the right moment each time," Ashford replied. "That's all, patience and proper aim." "It's more than that, sir. I don't know what to call it. Natural talent? Gift? The way you positioned, the way you led each target, accounted for their movements. Other pilots spray bullets and hope. You shoot like a sniper." They landed at Coltishall just before midnight, taxiing to the dispersal area where ground crew waited. When Ashford shut down the engines and climbed out, he found the entire squadron waiting, along with the station commander, Group Captain Morrison. Word had spread. 7 bombers in one patrol, using 7 bursts, with an ammunition expenditure of less than 15%. It was unprecedented, almost unbelievable. Morrison approached, his face serious. "Ashford, I need you to walk me through each engagement, every detail. If you found a method that's this effective, we need to teach it to every night fighter crew in Bomber Command." Over the next hour, Ashford described each engagement, drawing diagrams, explaining his positioning, his use of the blind spots, his patience in waiting for exactly 200 yards range before firing, his focus on specific aim points rather than just shooting at the general shape of the bomber. Morrison listened intently, asking questions, taking notes. When Ashford finished, Morrison sat back and shook his head slowly. "You're shooting them the way a gamekeeper shoots pheasants, not the way a fighter pilot engages enemies. Careful aim, 1 shot, clean kill. The other pilots, they're blazing away like they're hosing down a fire. Sir, with respect, this is how I was trained to shoot. In competition, you don't waste rounds. You aim carefully and make each shot count. I just applied the same principle to aerial gunnery." "And it bloody works," Morrison said. 7 kills in one sortie. Do you realize what this means? If we can teach even half of our night fighter crews to shoot with your precision, we could cut the bomber threat by a massive percentage. Over the next few days, Ashford's score of 7 bombers in one night became famous throughout Fighter Command. Newspapers got hold of the story, and suddenly Deadeye Ashford was on the front page, though now the nickname was used with admiration rather than mockery. The Air Ministry sent a team to interview him, to document his methods, to turn his instinctive shooting skills into a teachable system. The other pilots in his squadron stopped making jokes about his careful shooting. They asked questions instead, wanted to know how he aimed, how he judged distance at night, how he stayed so calm. Ashford tried to explain, but some things couldn't be taught. The patience, the ability to wait for the perfect shot, even when every instinct screamed at you to fire now, the almost mathematical precision in judging angles and distances, these were skills built over years of competitive shooting. You either had them or you didn't. But the basic principles could be taught. Proper positioning in the blind spots, waiting for optimum range rather than firing at extreme distance, aiming at specific points on the bomber rather than the general silhouette, firing controlled bursts rather than long sprays. The Air Ministry incorporated these principles into the night fighter training program, and gradually the effectiveness of RAF night fighters improved. Kill rates went up, ammunition expenditure went down. Ashford continued flying night missions throughout the winter of 1940–1941. His score climbed steadily, 12 kills by the end of October, 20 by Christmas, 31 by March. Almost all were bombers, and his ammunition efficiency remained extraordinary. He rarely needed more than 2 bursts to destroy a target, and he almost never missed when he fired. By the spring of 1941, the Blitz was winding down. The Luftwaffe had taken unsustainable losses from night fighters and anti-aircraft fire, and Hitler was redirecting his bombers east in preparation for the invasion of the Soviet Union. The pressure on Britain eased. Ashford was promoted to squadron leader and given command of a night fighter squadron. He trained his pilots in his methods, emphasizing accuracy over volume of fire, patience over aggression. His squadron achieved the highest kill-to-ammunition ratio in Fighter Command. In September 1941, Ashford was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his night fighting successes. The medal citation specifically mentioned his extraordinary marksmanship and the development of tactics that significantly improved the effectiveness of night fighter operations. He was sent on a speaking tour, visiting RAF stations across Britain, explaining his methods to other pilots. Some of them got it, adapted their shooting to be more precise, more calculated. Others couldn't break their habits of spraying bullets. But even a small improvement in overall effectiveness made a difference. By late 1941, the RAF's night fighter force had become genuinely effective, shooting down a significant percentage of German bombers that attempted night raids. The Luftwaffe's night bombing campaign had essentially failed, and Ashford's techniques had played a measurable role in that failure. The squadron mates who had once called him Deadeye as mockery now used the name with pride. He was their commander, their example, the man who had proven that precision mattered more than firepower, that one well-aimed shot was worth 100 poorly aimed ones. The laughing had stopped the night he destroyed 7 bombers without missing. It had been replaced by respect, admiration, and in some cases awe. Ashford flew combat missions until 1943, when he was promoted to wing commander and moved to a training command position. His final score was 53 confirmed kills, all but 2 of them bombers, all achieved with remarkable ammunition efficiency. After the war, aviation historians studied his combat records and calculated that his hit ratio, the percentage of rounds fired that actually hit the target, was more than 4 times higher than the average for RAF night fighter pilots. His average ammunition expenditure per kill was less than half the RAF standard. When asked about his success, Ashford always gave the same answer. "I was taught to shoot properly before I became a pilot. In competitive shooting, accuracy is everything. Wasting ammunition is seen as a sign of poor skill. I simply applied competitive shooting principles to aerial combat. Wait for the right moment, aim carefully, and make the shot count." The other pilots thought aerial combat was different, that you needed to spray bullets and hope. They were wrong. The fundamentals of good shooting are the same whether you're at a rifle range or in a fighter aircraft at midnight. Patience, proper aim, and the discipline to wait for the perfect moment. That's all it was. That, and perhaps being too stubborn to change my methods, even when everyone was laughing at me. Robert Ashford survived the war and lived until 1987, passing away at the age of 73. His shooting methods influenced RAF training for decades, and elements of his tactical approach are still taught to fighter pilots today. The night he destroyed 7 bombers with 7 bursts entered the historical record as one of the most remarkable displays of aerial marksmanship in any air force, any war. And it had been achieved by a man whose careful, precise shooting style had made him a laughingstock, right up until the moment it made him a legend.